Hey guys, what's up? It's Deprimido. Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm here in FL Studio and I'm going to be starting a four-part series. It's going to be going into the basics of the four biggest parts of making a beat. And what those are melody, drums, mixing, and arrangement. So today we're doing melody, and I'm just going to be diving into a few melodies, explaining how I made them and how you can make your own melodies. Because at the end of the day, like, melodies are probably the very most important part of your entire beat. It's what gets the rapper interested or the singer. And like it's the first thing that people hear generally, so it's really important, and it's the bass line for the whole rest of the song. So it's very important, and it's the first thing that you're going to be doing, so I figured I would make it the first video in the series. So I've got three melodies here. They're all different styles, and I'm going to be showing you the similarities and the differences and just how to make them. So this first one is kind of like a rod wave, polo G, Lil TJ type of melody, and it sounds like this. So it's one of those nice emotional piano melodies. So the first thing that you want to notice is the chord progression. So starting off, it's only three chords, and they are these three chords. I'm going to just copy them, put them on a new pattern, and we can hear them alone. Right, nice and simple, a little bit of bounce with the rhythm here. And so very much this is the first part that you want to do. This is what you want to start with, and you know, even more than that, you want to start with just the simple bass line, which is this. Right, so this is the main melody for the entire song. You know, it's really leading up to everything else. So we can add the rest of the chords back in, and then we can move on to the next part, which is the transition notes. So I'm going to copy these as well so that we can look at them without the top line. So the purpose of these transition notes, they're generally going to be close in the scale to the chords. They might even be on the same notes as the chords. And the point is to lead from one chord to the next one. So you can hear this one. It's the same three notes going all the way through from the first chord, the transition note, and the second chord. And that way it just leads into it, and it gets you prepared to hear the second chord. Now this one is walking down from the root note of the second chord to the root note of the third chord. Right, very simple. And so this is a transition note because it leads you to the next chord, right? That's the whole purpose of a transition note. And this is the second part that you want to do after you lay down the chords. Now, another important thing when you're making a melody, generally you want to make them be 8 bars. And the first set of 4 bars and the second set of 4 bars are going to be very similar, but in the second set you want to add a little bit of variation so that it is actually an 8-bar loop and not just a 4-bar loop. And the way that I did that here is with these transition notes. The first one sounded like this. It was just the chord, but then on the second 4 bars I added transition notes. Now these transition notes are probably the best example of them in this entire chord progression and melody, because it's literally just walking straight down, right? So it starts on the 5th of this chord, and it goes back to the root note of this one. So it's like this, right there, right? So that's a really good example of transition notes and how you want to use them, because they're very important in your chord progressions and overall in your melody. Now the last part of this is the top line, which is all of this stuff. It's very important because it makes the melody interesting, really, because if you just had the chords, for example, that's boring. You don't want that to be your whole melody. So that's why you add the top line. And so I'm going to go kind of more in depth with this top line. So this right here, it doesn't really have a name, I guess, but I usually call them flails because it kind of flails, right? It just goes really quickly, and the way that I did that was I put a note. We can shorten this up quite a lot to there, and we can stretch this one out. So I put two notes right on top of each other, then I selected them, I pressed Alt S, and that's going to strum it, and then I usually like to bring it to around here for this type of thing. You press accept, and then you press Control L, and that's going to stretch them to fit to the next note. Right, so it's shorter than a full note, and it just kind of makes the actual note that you're playing, this one, it just makes it kind of pop out a little bit. And I like to do them at the start of little runs or licks like that. They don't work as well if you were to do them in the middle of a run because that doesn't really make sense. But at the beginning, it helps that first note really pop out and sound really good. So next, I'm going to be talking about how we could make this melody better. So the first thing is called inversions or chord voicing. And for this one, there's not a lot that we're going to do, but we are going to do one right here. So you can see, for the most part in these chords, the notes are pretty close together, except for up here, they're much higher than everything else. So what we can do is select those, press Control, and press the down arrow, and then that'll bring them down an octave. You could also do it the other way around, bringing other notes up the octave. But for this one, everything is pretty close together, so I brought these down, and you can hear the difference. And the reason you do that is because when somebody's actually playing the piano, you want to move your hands as little as you can. You don't want to have big movements all across the keyboard. You want to keep your hands as close to where they originally were as possible because it's going to be faster and easier and take less energy. And so you're going to do these inversions and it'll make it sound more realistic. Another thing you can do to make it more realistic, I've already done here, and that's strumming it. It's the same thing we did up here, but you want to do it a lot less. So for me, what it does is it strums your chords. So think about it like a guitar. When you're playing a guitar and you're playing a chord, you strum down, you're not hitting every string exactly at the same time. There's a little tiny gap between the time that you hit the bottom string and the top string, for example. So that's what this is. You can see it right here. And the way you do it, again, is you press Alt S. When I'm strumming full chords, I usually like to have it closer to around here for the start. And then you also want to preserve the end, otherwise it's just going to move the entire note out and then it won't end where you want it to. So you want to press preserve end, and then that's pretty much all you got to do. It's very simple, and then it sounds like this, right? As opposed to just this. So it's a very subtle difference, but it does make a big difference. And the final thing that you can do to make these types of melodies better is press Alt R, and that's going to open up your randomizer. Now, what this does is you've got 6 different parameters for every single note. So you've got the pan, the velocity, the release, the mod X, mod Y, and the pitch. You definitely don't want to worry about these 3 in the randomizer. You probably don't want to worry about the release either. The only thing you're ever really going to be randomizing is the velocity is the biggest thing, and then sometimes the panning. I usually don't do anything with the panning. I only really care about the velocity. And then you can also change the seed so that if you don't like a certain pattern that it randomized it to, you can change it. Just go through right here, and then you can change the amount. So if you have it straight up, it's not going to do it at all. If you turn it left, it's going to do it this way. And if you turn it right, it's going to invert that, essentially. And the reason for that is because when somebody's actually playing a piano or any instrument, not every single note is going to be the exact same volume because we're not machines. So it's essentially just to humanize it along with the strumming. I usually do it around there, maybe a little less for this one. I might change the C to around there. And then a lot of people don't do this, but you want to make sure that you listen through the melody at least once after you randomize it to see if there's any notes that stick out too much. So right here, I don't really like how loud that one is, so I'm going to turn it down a little bit. And these two notes are transition notes kind of, and they go together. They're also kind of part of the top line, but they go together, and so you don't want the velocity to be too big of a difference. So it was kind of like this, and then this one's way down here. So I'm bringing this one down so that they're closer together, right? Like that. And you want to just go through the whole melody, make sure that everything sounds pretty good, and that'll make your melodies, if you do that and you strum them, your melodies are going to sound 10 times more realistic. They're going to sound really, really good. And if you follow that whole process of setting up first your root notes, then your chords, then your transition notes, and then your top line, then strumming it and randomizing it, doing inversions, it's going to sound really good. Now the final thing, you're not going to do this on every melody, but on a lot you are. And what you're going to want to do is you're going to grab your root notes, you're going to highlight them all, and you're going to put your mouse over one, press shift and click, and then you're going to press control down. Pressing shift and clicking, that's going to duplicate them. And now you've got them down an octave. And what this does is it just fills out the melody, but it doesn't make it more complicated. So you can hear the difference. So you're going to want to do that a lot of the time, especially on piano melodies like this. You're pretty much always going to want to do that. That's how I would improve this melody. Next, we're going to move on to this melody. So this one is also pretty simple. You can see it looks a lot simpler than the last one. This is kind of more of a dark piano melody, maybe for 21 Savage or somebody like that. So we're going to listen to this really quick. So even though this melody is a lot different than the other one, I made it the same way. I started off with the chords. So this is a 1 chord, and it's a 1 chord because it starts on the root note, which is D sharp. We're in the D sharp scale, by the way. Then it goes to a 1 diminished, which is that. And the way that you make a diminished chord is you put the 1, then you put the 2, then you leave the 3 and the 4 empty, and you put the 5. Whereas with a regular chord, you would put a note on the 1, skip the 2, put a note on the 3, skip the 4, put a note on the 5. So you're just moving the 3 down to the 2 instead of the 3. And that's the entire chord progression throughout the entire thing, is just that. Next, we've got these transition notes. Everything that is on the piano is either a chord or a transition. There's no top melody on this. We put that on a flute, but I have that muted right now, and I'm going to show you that in a minute. But this and these, they're all transition notes, and so this is a very simple melody right here. But now let's add the flute. This is the top line. So I did pretty much the same thing as I did on this one, except for this time I changed the instrument and I made this top line. With this flute, it's got kind of a higher release, so I didn't do any of the flails because otherwise it would be trailing over too much and that doesn't sound good. So I just kept it nice and simple. Another thing is when you're making your top line melodies, you're going to notice between both of these that all of the intervals or the lengths of the notes, they're all for the most part pretty similar. I don't have 20 different note lengths. There's like 3, maybe 4 in here. Same with this one. There's whole notes, half notes, and quarter notes. So you want to do that, and you want to keep the rhythm throughout pretty consistent, because the melody is the first part of the bounce of the beat, and the bounce of the beat is what lets the rapper find a flow. So you don't want to have it be going crazy, or else they're not going to be able to find a flow. So I'm not going to go too much into this melody because the way that I put it together is very similar to this one. But all the same things apply. We can randomize it, we can strum it, and we can copy the root notes and bring them down. For this one, I might not actually use the root notes because it's the same the entire time. I might use the third because that's what changes. Right, so that's pretty much how I made this melody. It's again very simple like the last one, pretty much the same process, but it's a very different melody. And now probably the most different melody out of all of these. I used a guitar for this one. It just came out of Expand and it sounds like this originally. But I put it through Guitar Rig so that it would sound better. But yeah, so this is, I still made it the same way essentially, but it's a little bit different. You can see the chord progression on this one. So these are the same chord, but on the first one, I just took out the fifth. On the second one, I took out the third. But if I hadn't done that, you can see that they're the same chord. I just took out one note from each of them. And that's the whole chord progression. Then this one is kind of different because the transition notes are part of the top line. So if we listen to the entire thing, you can hear these right here. That's the transition note pretty much, as well as this. But the rest of it is all top line. But if we were to take out the transition notes, the top line doesn't work because it doesn't resolve itself. You can tell that you want to hear this note. Otherwise, it doesn't resolve it. So while this is a transition note, it's also part of the top line because it resolves the top line itself. But other than that, I made it very similarly, and we can do the same thing, strum it and randomize it. For this one, I wouldn't bring the root notes down on guitars. I don't usually like to do that because when you look at a guitar, it's only got 6 strings and it only covers, I think, 3 octaves. So while we definitely could, this is less than an octave right here. Well, it's about an octave. I don't like to have super low notes on a guitar because it kind of makes it muddy and it doesn't sound as good or realistic because you can only play 6 strings at once, and this is, if we did that in some places, it would be more than 6 notes. So that's something to keep in mind when you're making guitar melodies, but if it were a piano or something, I would still bring the notes down. I just don't think it sounds as good on guitar, but we can still strum it and randomize it and all of that to make it sound more realistic, and it'll sound better like this. Right, so it's still very simple. It's still made essentially the same way, but we've got 3 different melodies here that were all made the exact same process went into them, but they're all very different. So yeah, that's pretty much how you make melodies. It's all very, very simple really when you get down to it. You just got to be creative and make sure that you're not doing the same thing over and over in every beat, because then you're going to get bored, and who wants to get bored? That's no fun. So yeah, thank you all for watching the video. I really appreciate it. Please drop a like if you enjoyed. Also go over and follow me on Instagram. I only need 75 more followers to hit 1,000, and when I do, I'm going to be dropping a free MIDI pack that you can all download and use in your beats. Also subscribe here on YouTube. When I hit 50 subs, I'm going to drop a free melody guitar pack with melodies kind of like this one. They're all going to be a little bit better. But yeah, so thank you all for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will talk to you all in the next video.